I'm Mary Thompson, 67, recently widowed. 3 months ago, my son sent me a text. Sold your apartment and Dad's car. Goodbye. He betrayed me for a luxury cruise. But Richard didn't know about the secret my husband Alfred left behind. A hidden legacy that would change everything and force us both to choose between revenge and redemption. But before I tell you this story, like this video, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Now let me take you back to that terrible day when everything fell apart. The phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, a sound that would shatter what remained of my world. I was arranging Alfred's favorite teacup collection when I saw Richard's name flash across the screen. My heart lifted momentarily. Perhaps he was finally calling to check on me. Perhaps he'd remembered it had been 3 months since his father's funeral. We're leaving tomorrow, Mom. Sold your apartment and Dad's car. Goodbye. The teacup slipped from my fingers, exploding into porcelain shards across the tile floor. I stared at those words until they blurred, reading them again and again, certain I'd misunderstood. But there was no misunderstanding the cold finality of that exclamation point, the casual cruelty of reducing decades to a text message. My legs gave out. I sank onto Alfred's worn armchair, the one that still smelled faintly of his cologne and pipe tobacco. The leather creaked beneath me, familiar and comforting, even as my world crumbled. Sold your apartment, this apartment where Richard took his first steps, where Alfred taught him to ride a bicycle in the hallway during that endless rainy week, where we'd celebrated 43 Christmases, hung 43 stockings, baked countless cookies that filled these rooms with cinnamon and love, and Dad's car, that 1967 Mustang convertible, Alfred's pride and joy, the car he'd restored bolt by bolt in our garage, spending every Saturday for 2 years bringing it back to life, the car he'd promised would be Richard's someday. When you're ready to appreciate what matters, son. I pressed trembling fingers against my eyes, but the tears came anyway, hot, angry, helpless. When had my boy become this stranger? I traced backward through memories like flipping through a photo album in reverse. There was Richard at 35, showing up for Christmas dinner 2 hours late with Lauren, barely staying an hour. Richard at 28, too busy for Sunday calls. Richard at 22, embarrassed by our modest home when his college friends visited, and Lauren, God, Lauren, I tried so hard with her, welcomed her, praised her, bit my tongue when she made cutting remarks about our quaint lifestyle. I'd watched her wrap my son in designer labels and expensive tastes, watched him drift further into a world where love was measured in price tags and square footage. The afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the living room. Outside the window, I could see Alfred's Mustang gleaming in its parking spot, the sunset turning its burgundy paint to liquid fire. How many times had we driven along the coast in that car, wind in our hair, his hand finding mine on the leather seat. Tomorrow, they were taking it all tomorrow. My gaze fell on the mahogany desk in the corner, Alfred's desk. He'd spent his final weeks there, sorting through papers, organizing documents with that meticulous care that had defined his entire life. I'd thought it was morbid then, the way he'd insisted everything be properly arranged. But Alfred had smiled that knowing smile of his. Trust me, Mary, I'm taking care of you, even when I can't be here. With shaking hands, I pulled open the bottom drawer. It stuck as it always had, requiring that special jiggling motion Alfred had mastered. Inside lay a leather portfolio I'd never noticed before, embossed with our initials, AG and MT. The portfolio fell open to reveal documents, certificates, letters, all in Alfred's precise handwriting. On top, an envelope with my name written in his familiar script. My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, then you've discovered that our son has made choices I hoped he'd never make, but don't despair. My love, I've ensured you'll be protected. Trust the plan. Trust Mr. Harrison, and remember, sometimes the deepest love requires the hardest lessons. Forever yours, Alfred. My tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly, but something else rose within me, pushing through the grief and betrayal, something Alfred had always admired, my spine of steel beneath the gentle exterior. I reached for my phone with steady fingers this time and dialed a number from the documents. Harrison and Associates, how may I help you? This is Mary Thompson, I said, my voice surprisingly firm. I need to speak with Mr. Harrison immediately. It's about my late husband's estate. Mr. Harrison's office smelled of old leather and lemon polish, the scent of permanence, of things carefully preserved. He was younger than I'd imagined, perhaps 50, with kind eyes that had seen their share of family tragedies play out across his polished desk. Mrs. Thompson, he stood, extending his hand. I've been expecting your call, though I'd hoped it wouldn't be necessary. You knew, my voice cracked, you knew Richard would do this. He gestured to the chair across from him. Your husband was a remarkably perceptive man. He didn't know specifics, but he understood. Vulnerabilities. Please, sit. I lowered myself into the leather chair, clutching my purse like a lifeline. Through the window behind him, the city sprawled in miniature, people living their uncomplicated lives, unaware that mine was being reconstructed from fragments. Mr. Harrison opened a file so thick it required both hands. Your husband spent the last 5 years of his life ensuring you'd be protected. What Richard sold, or believes he sold, was never actually his to sell. My heart hammered. I don't understand. The apartment is held in an irrevocable trust. Established 8 years ago, you're the sole beneficiary, with complete control. Richard had no legal authority to sell it. The transaction is void. He slid a document toward me, as is the sale of the Mustang. The car's title was transferred to a separate trust 3 years ago. I stared at the papers, Alfred's signature swimming before my eyes. But Richard had access to the deed. He showed buyers. He had access to copies. The originals, the legally binding documents, have been in my possession since your husband's passing. Mr. Harrison's expression softened. Alfred anticipated this possibility. He loved your son, Mrs. Thompson, but he wasn't blind to his character. The words should have brought relief. Instead, they opened a chasm of grief. Alfred had known. He'd watched our son drift toward this moment and had quietly, methodically built walls to protect me from the inevitable collision. There's more. Mr. Harrison pulled out another folder. Your husband maintained several investment accounts. Stocks, bonds, real estate holdings. The beach house in Malibu, for instance. Beach house, I whispered. We don't own a beach house. You do now. Alfred purchased it 15 years ago as an investment property. It's been rented out, generating income that's been reinvested, current value, approximately $2.3 million. He paused, watching my reaction. There are 3 other properties, Mrs. Thompson, and a portfolio worth just over $5 million. The room tilted. I gripped the armrests, trying to anchor myself to reality. That's impossible. Alfred was a high school teacher. I was a teacher. We lived modestly. Your husband was a brilliant investor. He studied the markets the way other men study sports. Every spare dollar, every bonus, every inheritance, he invested wisely and waited patiently. Mr. Harrison's voice filled with admiration. He never touched it because he didn't need to. You both had enough. This was always meant for your future, for security. Richard doesn't know. It wasn't a question. No one knows except you, me, and the trust administrator. Alfred was very clear. This information was to be revealed only if you needed protection, which, it seems, you do. I thought of Richard on that cruise ship tomorrow, champagne in hand, celebrating his clever manipulation. The image filled me with something I'd never felt toward my son before. Rage, pure and righteous. What are my options? I asked quietly. Mr. Harrison leaned forward. Legally, we file a fraud complaint, notify the buyers that the sales were invalid, recover your property, and possibly press criminal charges. He paused. But that's the legal answer. The personal answer is more complicated. He's my son. Yes, and he's committed fraud against his own mother. The words hung between us, stark and undeniable. Alfred left you a letter. He asked that I give it to you when the time came. He handed me an envelope, heavier than it should be. Inside, Alfred's handwriting covered 3 pages. My eyes blurred, reading his words, his voice echoing in my mind as clearly as if he sat beside me. You have the power now, my love. Use it wisely. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like boundaries. Sometimes it looks like letting someone fall so they can learn to stand. I trust you to know which this moment requires. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my purse alongside the tissue I'd been shredding. When I looked up at Mr. Harrison, my decision had crystallized. File the complaints, notify the buyers, I want everything stopped. I stood, surprised by the steadiness in my legs. And Mr. Harrison, I want my son to understand exactly what he's lost and who protected him all along. His smile was grim. I'll begin immediately. The papers will be filed by end of business today. Outside, the afternoon had turned golden. I walked past Alfred's Mustang, running my fingers along its smooth curves. Tomorrow, Richard would discover that some things, some people, can't be sold, discarded, or betrayed without consequence. Thank you, I whispered to the sky, to Alfred, to whatever force had given me this armor when I needed it most. The real battle was just beginning. The call came at 6:47 a.m. I was already awake, had been for hours, watching dawn break over the city from Alfred's armchair. I'd spent the night there, unable to sleep in our bed alone, surrounded by ghosts of better days. "Mom!" Richard's voice exploded through the speaker, making me pull the phone away from my ear. "What the hell have you done?" I took a slow breath, centering myself. "Good morning, Richard. Don't good morning me. I just got a call from the buyer's attorney. They're saying the apartment sale is invalid, that I committed fraud." His voice pitched higher with each word. "You can't do this. Actually, I can. The apartment was never yours to sell. That's insane. Dad left everything to you, and you're my mother. It's the same thing." I closed my eyes, remembering the little boy who used to curl up in this same chair, asking me to read just one more story. Where had that child gone? "Your father left everything to me, Richard. Not to you, not to us, to me. Protected in trusts you apparently knew nothing about." My voice remained steady, though my hands trembled. "The car, too. Neither sale is valid. You're lying. This is some kind of mistake." "No mistake. I met with your father's attorney yesterday. Everything is documented. Legal and irrevocable." I paused, letting the words sink in. "The buyers are being notified today. You'll need to return their money." Silence stretched across the line. When Richard spoke again, his tone had shifted from rage to something calculating. "Look, Mom, I know you're upset about the text. Lauren said I should have called, but we've been so busy with preparations." "Don't!" The word came out sharper than intended. "Don't insult me by pretending this is about a text message. Then what is it about? Dad's been gone 3 months. You don't need that big apartment anymore, and the car just sits there. It's about you selling my home and your father's most precious possession without asking, without my consent, without even the courtesy of a conversation." My voice broke despite my resolve. "It's about you treating me like an obstacle to be removed instead of your mother." Jesus Christ. "You're being so dramatic. We were going to give you some of the money." "I don't want your money, Richard. I want my son back. But I'm beginning to think he's been gone much longer than 3 months." Through the phone, I heard Lauren's voice in the background, sharp and insistent. Richard covered the mouthpiece, but I caught fragments. "Just emotional. Manipulate you. Threaten her back." When he returned, his voice had hardened. "Fine. You want to play it this way? My lawyer will be in touch. We'll see what a judge thinks about you trying to keep your own son's inheritance from him. I'm not keeping anything from you. Richard, there was never any inheritance for you to take. That's what you think." His laugh was bitter. "Dad was a teacher, Mom. Teachers don't set up complex trusts and secret investments. You're being played by that attorney. Can't you see? He's probably stealing from you right now. Your father was brilliant. Something you might have learned if you'd spent less time being embarrassed by him and more time actually knowing him." The words detonated between us. I heard Richard's sharp intake of breath. "How dare you? How dare I?" Something inside me snapped. "How dare you? Your father worked himself to exhaustion providing for this family. He taught during the day and tutored at night. He invested every spare penny, studied every weekend, built something real and lasting. Not for himself, but for us, for me. And you have the audacity to sell his legacy like it's garage sale junk to fund a vacation. It wasn't just a vacation. We needed this, needed to get away from—" He stopped abruptly. "From what, Richard? Your mother who just lost her husband, the apartment filled with memories of your childhood, or maybe from the guilt of knowing you haven't called me once since the funeral." Silence. I raised you better than this, I continued, softer now. I know I did. So did your father, which means somewhere along the way, you chose to become this person, and that breaks my heart more than any apartment or car ever could. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Richard said finally, his voice tight. The debt, the expectations, Lauren's family. Then you should have come to me, talked to me, asked for help. Tears streamed down my face, but my voice held firm. Instead, you tried to rob me. I didn't. It wasn't robbery. It was just, what would you call it, Richard? More muffled conversation. Then, my attorney will contact you and Mom. You're making a huge mistake. This family is going to find out what kind of person you really are. The line went dead. I sat there as the sun climbed higher, painting the room in shades of gold and amber. The apartment felt different now. No longer a museum of my past, but a fortress. Alfred had built these walls around me, and I would honor that protection. My phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Harrison. Documents filed, buyers notified. Your son's attorney will likely call today. Don't speak to them without me present. I typed back. He already called. I held my ground. Good. This is going to get harder before it gets better. Are you prepared? I looked around the apartment, at Alfred's books lining the shelves, his reading glasses still on the side table, his presence woven into every corner. Then I looked at my reflection in the window, seeing something I hadn't seen in months. Strength. I'm ready, I texted back. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. But inside these walls, surrounded by 43 years of love and one man's unwavering foresight, I felt safer than I had in months. Let the storm come. I would weather it. The courthouse smelled of industrial cleaner and nervous sweat. I sat beside Mr. Harrison on a wooden bench worn smooth by decades of anxious hands, watching strangers navigate their own legal catastrophes. In 3 minutes, I'd face my son across a courtroom. Remember, Mr. Harrison murmured, stay calm. Answer only what's asked. Don't let emotion override fact. I nodded, though my breakfast threatened rebellion through the courtroom's frosted glass doors. I could see silhouettes moving. Richard's legal team, probably, preparing their attack. The doors opened. Richard emerged first, wearing a suit I didn't recognize. Expensive charcoal gray, the kind Alfred would have called too fancy for real work. Our eyes met. He looked away first. Lauren followed, her heels clicking authoritatively against the marble floor. She'd transformed since I'd last seen her. Sharper somehow. Harder. She whispered something to Richard, her hand possessive on his arm. He nodded, but his shoulders hunched forward, a gesture I recognized from his childhood. My boy was scared. Good, a voice inside me thought. Then immediately, what kind of mother thinks that? All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Kowalski presiding. Judge Kowalski was 60-something, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She surveyed the courtroom with the weariness of someone who'd seen too many families tear themselves apart over money. This is a preliminary hearing regarding property disputes between Mary Thompson and her son, Richard Thompson. She glanced at her notes. Mr. Morrison, you represent the plaintiff. Richard's attorney stood, a man whose suit probably cost more than Alfred's Mustang. Yes, Your Honor, my client seeks to establish his rightful claim to property he understood to be his inheritance following his father's death. Mrs. Thompson is represented by Harrison and Associates. Your Honor, Mr. Harrison's voice carried quiet confidence. We're here to demonstrate that no such inheritance exists and that Mr. Richard Thompson committed fraud in attempting to sell property he didn't own. Judge Kowalski's eyebrow arched. Strong language, Counselor. Accurate language, Your Honor. The next hour blurred into a parade of documents, testimonies, legal precedents. Mr. Harrison presented Alfred's trust documents, dated and notarized years before his death. He showed the original property deeds, the car title, every piece of paper that proved ownership had never transferred to Richard. Morrison countered with claims of undue influence, suggesting I'd manipulated Alfred in his final years. The accusation landed like a slap. My client has reason to believe his mother isolated his father, controlling access to medical decisions and estate planning. Objection! Mr. Harrison's voice cut through the courtroom. Pure speculation without evidence. Sustained. Judge Kowalski's gaze sharpened on Morrison. Do you have evidence of undue influence? Morrison shuffled papers. We're prepared to present character witnesses who will testify to Mrs. Thompson's controlling nature. Your Honor, Mr. Harrison interjected, we have testimony from Mr. Thompson's longtime physician, his financial advisor, and 3 colleagues who all confirm he was mentally sharp until his final day. The trusts were established 8 years ago, when he was 59 and in perfect health. The suggestion of undue influence is not only baseless but offensive. The judge leaned back. I tend to agree. Mr. Morrison, unless you have concrete evidence, I'd advise moving on. I watched Richard's face crumble slightly. Lauren leaned in, whispering urgently. He shook his head. Then came the buyer's testimony. The Hendersons, a young couple who'd been days from closing on our apartment, sat in the witness box looking betrayed. We gave Mr. Thompson a deposit of $150,000, Mr. Henderson explained. He showed us the deed, property tax records, everything. He said his mother was moving to assisted living and couldn't handle the paperwork. I flinched. Assisted living? Richard had told them I was feeble, incapable. When did you learn the sale was invalid? Mr. Harrison asked gently. 4 days ago, we'd already given notice at our rental, packed up our daughter's rooms. Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked. We have nowhere to go next month. Guilt washed over me. These innocent people caught in my family's warfare. I'm sorry, I mouthed to her. She looked away. Then Lauren took the stand. I braced myself. Miss Sanders, what was your understanding of your fiancé's inheritance? Richard told me his father left everything to his mother. Naturally, but that it was understood the property would eventually pass to him. He said Mary had been talking about downsizing for years. Lies, delivered smoothly as silk. Did Mrs. Thompson ever explicitly say she wanted to sell? Lauren's pause was calculated. Not in those exact words, but she'd make comments about how big the apartment was, how lonely Richard was trying to help her, to take that burden off her shoulders. Mr. Harrison rose for cross-examination. Miss Sanders, when did you last speak directly with Mrs. Thompson? It's been a while. How long? 6 months, maybe. 8 months, actually. Christmas dinner, which you left after 40 minutes. Mr. Harrison consulted his notes. And in that conversation, did Mrs. Thompson mention selling? She said the apartment felt empty without Alfred. Feeling empty and wanting to sell are quite different, wouldn't you say? I suppose. But did you ever encourage Richard to discuss these plans with his mother directly? Lauren's composure slipped. It wasn't my place to. Because you knew she'd refuse, didn't you? You knew this was fraud. Objection, badgering the witness. Withdrawn. Mr. Harrison returned to his seat. Point made. The judge called a recess. In the hallway, I leaned against the cool wall, trembling. You're doing well, Mr. Harrison said. The evidence is overwhelming. Through the crowd, I saw Richard standing alone. Lauren was on her phone, pacing, animated. As I watched, Richard tried to touch her arm. She shrugged him off, walking away mid-conversation. Something in his posture reminded me of the 8-year-old who'd struck out at his little league game, trying so hard not to cry. I'd held him then. Whispered that failure wasn't forever, that love didn't depend on winning. When had I stopped being the person he turned to in defeat? Court reconvened. Judge Kowalski's decision was swift. I find the evidence conclusive. Mr. Alfred Thompson established legal trusts that remain valid and binding. Richard Thompson had no authority to sell the properties in question. The sales are voided. All deposits must be returned within 30 days. She paused, her gaze settling on Richard. Young man, you're fortunate your mother hasn't pressed criminal charges. Fraud is a serious offense. I suggest you find a way to make this right with everyone you've hurt. The gavel fell. I'd won. So why did victory taste like ash? 2 weeks after the court ruling, Mr. Harrison called with an address. The beach house in Malibu. I thought you should see it before deciding what to do with the property. I'd avoided thinking about the beach house, about any of Alfred's hidden gifts. They felt tainted now. Weapons in a war I'd never wanted to fight. But curiosity won, or maybe loneliness. The apartment had grown too quiet, too full of ghosts, and victory's hollow echo. The drive took 3 hours through traffic that gave me too much time to think. The Hendersons had their deposit back, but not their dreams. The local paper had run the story. Elderly widow battles, son over estate, Comments online ranged from supportive to vicious. Several called me heartless. One suggested I was senile, manipulated by greedy lawyers. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from distant relatives I barely knew, all suddenly interested in my well-being. The church ladies whispered when I attended Sunday service. I'd stopped going after the second week. The beach house sat behind gates on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. My hands shook inserting the key Harrison had given me. The gate swung open silently, revealing a gravel drive lined with bougainvillea, and there, parked in the circular driveway, was Richard's Honda, the sensible sedan he'd owned before Lauren convinced him he needed a BMW. My heart hammered. He wasn't supposed to be here. How had he even gotten the address? I parked beside his car and approached the house on trembling legs. The front door stood ajar. Through it I heard nothing. No movement, no voices. Just the crash of waves against rocks below. "Richard!" My voice disappeared into the cavernous interior. The house was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing an endless ocean. Open-concept living spaces filled with afternoon light. Furniture sat covered in white sheets like sleeping ghosts. "Richard, I know you're here." A sound from the back. The scrape of a chair, maybe. I followed it through a chef's kitchen, past a dining room that could seat 12, to French doors opening onto a terrace. He sat there, in a plastic lawn chair, staring at the ocean. His suit jacket lay crumpled beside him. His tie hung loose. In his hand, an empty glass. "Nice place," he said without turning. Dad always had great taste, didn't he? Even when he was pretending to be poor, he wasn't pretending anything. He just didn't need to prove his worth with possessions. Richard laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Right. He just secretly bought multi-million-dollar beach houses. Very humble." I moved closer. His face was unshaven, eyes red-rimmed. The BMW was gone, I realized. Just the Honda remained. "Lauren left," he said, reading my thoughts. 2 days after the court hearing, took the BMW. Turns out I'd put it in her name for insurance reasons. Took her clothes, her jewelry, the furniture we'd bought together. Left me a note saying she couldn't be with someone without prospects. He raised the empty glass in mock toast. Prospects. That's what I was to her. That's all I've ever been to anyone. That's not true, isn't it? He finally looked at me and the pain in his eyes nearly broke me. You and Dad built this whole life I knew nothing about. Trusts, properties, millions of dollars. You let me grow up thinking we were just barely making it, that I had to claw my way to success, or I'd end up like you, stuck in some mediocre teaching job, driving a car older than me. We wanted you to understand the value of work. You wanted me to feel ashamed. He stood abruptly, the chair clattering backward. Do you know what it was like, Mom? Having friends whose parents were doctors, lawyers, executives, while mine corrected grammar for a living. Being the scholarship kid at college, while roommates got new cars for their birthdays. We paid for your education. You made me feel poor. Every time I wanted something, every time I asked for help, you'd lecture about saving and sacrifice and being grateful for what we have. Meanwhile, Dad was sitting on millions. His voice cracked. You taught me that having things made you shallow, that wanting more meant you were greedy, and then I find out you were rich all along. What does that make you, liars, hypocrites? The words hit like physical blows. I gripped the terrace railing, salt air stinging my eyes. We taught you that character matters more than possessions, that you don't need wealth to be worthy. Those aren't lies, Richard. They are when you're living a double life. He paced now, agitated. All those years, all those lessons about humility and hard work, were you laughing at me, watching me struggle while you had this safety net I didn't even know existed? The safety net was for me, for my future. Your father worked hard for you. Everything was for you. What about me? What about your son? His face contorted. I had to watch my wife leave because I couldn't maintain the lifestyle she expected. I had to return $150,000 to the Hendersons. Money I don't have, Mom. I had to take a loan from her father just to cover it. Do you understand what that cost me? My pride, my dignity, any chance at respect from her family. You stole from me, I said quietly. You tried to sell my home without permission. That's not pride, Richard. That's not dignity. I was desperate. Then you should have asked. You should have called your mother and said, "I need help," instead of "goodbye." Tears streamed freely now. Do you know what that message did to me? Coming 3 months after burying the love of my life, finding out my only child cared so little he couldn't even pick up the phone. "I care," his shout echoed off the ocean. "I've always cared, but it's never been enough for you two, has it? I wasn't Alfred. Brilliant, patient, perfect Alfred. I was just me, mediocre, disappointing. The son who chose business over teaching, who wanted nice things, who wasn't satisfied with enough. That's not fair, isn't it?" He laughed bitterly. "Tell me honestly, Mom, when you look at me, do you see someone you're proud of? Or do you see someone who fell short of Dad's example?" The question hung between us. Brutal in its honesty, I wanted to lie, to say of course I was proud, but standing there, looking at my son, this stranger in expensive clothes who'd tried to rob me, I didn't know what I felt. "I see someone I don't recognize anymore," I said finally. "I see someone who chose material comfort over his mother's well-being, someone who let his wife dictate his morals, someone who blamed everyone else for his choices." Richard flinched as if I'd struck him. "But I also see my little boy," I continued, voice breaking, "the one who built me card houses on Mother's Day, who cried when his goldfish died, who told me at 7 that he'd take care of me when I was old." I stepped closer. "Where did that boy go, Richard?" "He grew up," Richard's voice cracked. "He learned the world doesn't reward card houses and good intentions. He learned that being nice gets you nowhere. He learned—" His words dissolved into sobs. I watched my son collapse onto the terrace stones, his shoulders heaving, and every maternal instinct screamed to hold him, but something held me back. Maybe wisdom, maybe exhaustion, maybe the understanding that some falls need to be felt fully before healing can begin. "I don't know how to fix this," Richard whispered to the ocean. "I don't know how to fix me." "Neither do I admitted. The words felt like failure and truth simultaneously. "But I know this. You can't fix anything until you stop running from consequences." The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. We stood there, mother and son, separated by 10 feet and what felt like 10,000 broken promises, while the Pacific whispered its ancient, indifferent song against the shore below. I didn't sleep for 3 nights after Malibu. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard crumpled on that terrace, heard his broken confession echoing against the waves. The apartment felt different now, not a fortress, but a prison of my own making. On the 4th night, I found myself in Alfred's study at 3 a.m., surrounded by his books and the ghost of his pipe smoke. I'd been avoiding this room, but tonight the memories didn't hurt quite so much. They felt necessary, like medicine. I pulled out his journals, decades of leather-bound notebooks where he'd recorded not just investments and strategies, but thoughts, fears, dreams. I'd never read them before. It felt like trespassing. Even now, March 15th, 1998, Richard turned 13 today, bought him the bicycle he wanted, though it strained our budget. Mary worries we spoil him. I worry we don't show our love enough. How do you teach a child that security isn't the same as love, but that love should provide security? It's a balance I'm still learning. June 3rd, 2005. Richard graduated today, didn't thank us in his speech, mentioned his girlfriend's father instead, the mentor who showed him what success looks like. I saw Mary's face crumble. She tries to hide how his distance wounds her. I'm setting up the first trust tomorrow. If my son won't value us now, perhaps I can ensure he can't devalue us later. October 12, 2010 established the Beach House Trust today. Richard called last week asking for $50,000 for a business opportunity. Hung up when I suggested he work his way up instead of starting at the top. Mary cried for hours. She thinks we failed him somehow. I think we loved him exactly right. He just couldn't see it through his own ambition. I read until dawn broke, tracing Alfred's evolution, from hopeful father to resigned protector. He'd seen Richard's trajectory years before I'd admitted it to myself. But what struck me most was the love in every entry, the persistent hope that their son might someday understand. January 8th, 2024, diagnosis confirmed today, 6 months, maybe a year. Haven't told Mary yet. Need to finalize everything first. Updated the trusts, added the island property, left instructions with Harrison. My greatest fear isn't dying. It's leaving Mary vulnerable to our son's worst impulses. But my second greatest fear is that Richard never gets the chance to become better. Perhaps that's the parent's eternal dilemma, protecting those we love while leaving room for redemption. The island, I'd forgotten, mister. Harrison mentioning it, I rifled through the documents, finding a property deed for St. Catherine's Isle, 42 acres off the northern California coast, currently designated as a nature preserve. A sticky note in Alfred's handwriting was attached, where generations meet, where wisdom flows both ways, where forgiveness finds fertile ground. What had he envisioned? What was his plan for this place? My phone rang. Mr. Harrison apologizing for the early hour, but he'd seen my office light from the street. I couldn't sleep, I admitted. Neither could I. I've been thinking about your son, Mrs. Thompson, about what comes next. I've been thinking about nothing else. There are choices to make. Legal options regarding the fraud charges. The DA could still prosecute if you wished. Financial decisions about the properties, and personal choices about reconciliation. I stared at Alfred's journals, scattered across his desk like fallen leaves. What would you do if it were your son? That's not for me to say. Please. I need perspective from someone who isn't drowning in this. He was quiet for a long moment. My brother stole from our mother before she died, forged checks, sold her jewelry, convinced her to sign documents she didn't understand. When she passed, I had proof of everything. Could have sent him to prison, destroyed him financially. Instead, I gave him one chance to repay what he'd taken and get help. He refused, blamed me for turning the family against him. We haven't spoken in 12 years. His voice tightened. Sometimes offering redemption isn't enough. The person has to want to be redeemed. Does Richard want that? Only he can answer that question. But I'll tell you what I learned. You can't save someone from themselves. You can only decide whether to be there when they're ready to be saved. After we hung up, I pulled out the letter Alfred had left with Mr. Harrison, reading it again by morning light. Trust yourself, Mary. You've always had wisdom I lacked, the ability to see not just what is, but what could be. I've built walls to protect you, but don't let those walls become a cage for either of you. Love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's boundaries. Sometimes it's letting go. Sometimes it's the hardest word, no. But sometimes, my darling, it's also yes. A yes that demands change, that requires accountability, that says, I believe you can be better, so I'm giving you the tools to prove it. Tools, not money, not property. Tools. I spent the next week researching, making calls, sketching plans. Mr. Harrison watched my notes accumulate with growing curiosity. You're planning something, he observed during our meeting. I'm planning everything, I corrected. Alfred left blueprints, not just properties. It's time I understood what he was building toward. I contacted Richard's number. It rang 6 times before he answered. Mom, his voice was flat, defeated. Meet me at the beach house tomorrow, noon, come alone. I don't think, this isn't negotiable, Richard. You want a future. This is where it starts. I hung up before courage failed me. The next day, I arrived early, setting up in the living room I'd had cleaned and furnished. 2 chairs, a table between them, documents arranged in precise stacks. Richard arrived exactly at noon, parking the Honda with care he hadn't shown before. He'd shaved, wore clean clothes, but his eyes held the haunted look of someone who'd seen themselves clearly for the first time and hadn't liked the view. Sit, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. He sat. I've made a decision about your future. Before I share it, I need you to answer one question honestly. Can you do that? He nodded. Do you want to change? Not because you're broke or alone or ashamed. Not because you want your old life back, but because you genuinely want to become someone different. I leaned forward. Think carefully, Richard, because if the answer is no, we end this conversation right now. I'll give you nothing and you'll figure out your life without me. But if the answer is yes, if you truly want redemption, then I'm going to offer you something. Once. And if you waste it, there won't be a second chance. The ocean crashed below us. Richard stared at his hands. Hands that had signed fraudulent documents, that had typed that cruel goodbye message. When he looked up, tears streamed down his face. I want to change. he whispered. I don't know how, but I want to. I'm so tired of being this person, Mom. I'm exhausted from pretending and performing and never being enough. I miss who I used to be before I got so lost. Something in his voice rang true. Not the polished Richard who'd learned to say what people wanted to hear, but my son, stripped bare and desperate. I slid the first document across the table. This is the deed to a small apartment in the city. 2 bedrooms, modest but clean. It's yours in your name, but with conditions. His eyes widened. You will work. Any honest job that pays honestly. No schemes, no shortcuts. You'll see a therapist twice weekly for at least a year. You'll volunteer 10 hours every week at a senior center or homeless shelter. And you'll meet with me every Sunday for dinner, where you'll be honest about your struggles and progress. I slid across the second document. This outlines the conditions. Break any of them, and the apartment reverts to me, but fulfill them for 2 years. And it's yours free and clear, along with something else. What else? A chance to help build something meaningful. Your father left an island, Richard, 42 acres of preserved land. He wanted it to become a sanctuary, a place where generations connect, where elderly share wisdom and young people learn service. I'm going to build that dream, and if you prove yourself worthy over these 2 years, I'll let you help me. Richard stared at the documents, hands trembling. Why, after everything I did, why would you give me anything? Because your father believed in second chances, because I still see that 7-year-old who promised to take care of me, and because love isn't love if it only shows up when things are easy. I stood, gathering my purse. The choice is yours. Sign these documents and commit to changing, or walk away and we're done. Forever. I reached the door before he spoke. Mom, I turned. Thank you for not giving up on me, for being stronger than I deserved. Don't thank me yet, I said softly. Thank me when you've earned it. I left him there with the documents and the ocean and the weight of possibility. Whatever came next would be entirely up to him. 3 days passed in silence. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't check to see if Richard had signed the documents I'd left on that table overlooking the Pacific. Either he wanted to change, or he didn't. The decision had to be entirely his. On the 4th morning, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Richard standing there, the document folder tucked under his arm. Eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. I signed them, he said simply. All of them. And I want you to know, I understand what you're giving me. It's not the apartment, it's a chance to remember who I was supposed to become. Something tight in my chest loosened. Come in. We sat in the living room where he'd played with toy trucks as a child, where Alfred had read him bedtime stories, where 1,000 ordinary moments had built the foundation of our family. Strange how rooms hold memories like pressed flowers, fragile, faded, but preserved. I started looking for jobs, Richard said. Not executive positions, real work. There's a warehouse hiring and a grocery store needs night stalkers. Night stalking. I couldn't hide my surprise. I need to start at the bottom, Mom. Actually at the bottom this time. Not the bottom I thought I was at before. He managed a weak smile. Besides, it'll give me time to volunteer during the day. I already contacted 3 senior centers. One has an opening, helping with meal service and activities, and the therapy. First appointment is Tuesday. Dr. Patricia Chen, she specializes in... He paused, the words clearly difficult. Family estrangement and narcissistic patterns. The clinical term hung between us. My son had looked into the mirror and named what he saw there. That took courage I hadn't been sure he possessed. I'm proud of you, I said quietly, for doing this. Don't be proud yet. I haven't actually done anything except sign papers and make appointments. His voice turned rough. I spent 2 years treating you like an obstacle. I can't erase that with a signature. No, but you can build something new on top of the rubble. Over the following weeks, I watched Richard's transformation through Sunday dinners that felt like cautious archaeology, carefully brushing away layers of pretense to uncover something authentic beneath. The first Sunday, he arrived in his warehouse uniform, smelling of cardboard and honest sweat. I loaded trucks for 8 hours today, he said, showing me his blistered hands. I haven't worked like that since high school. Does it hurt? Everything hurts. My back, my pride, my assumptions about myself. He flexed his fingers. But it feels real. That's something. The second Sunday, he brought photos from the senior center. This is Margaret. She's 84 and spent 40 years as a jazz singer. She's teaching me about Miles Davis." His face brightened with genuine interest. "And this is Harold, Navy veteran, 3 wars. Makes jokes that would make a sailor blush. He reminds me of Dad. Actually, that same quiet strength. I studied the photos, seeing my son animated by others' stories rather than his own accomplishments. When had that last happened? The 3rd Sunday, he came undone. Dr. Chen asked me to write a letter," he said, voice cracking, "to Dad, telling him everything I wish I'd said before he died." Tears spilled over. "I couldn't do it, Mom. I sat there for an hour with a blank page because everything I wanted to say was, 'I'm sorry,' and that's not enough. It'll never be enough." I held my grown son while he sobbed into my shoulder, and for the first time since Alfred's funeral, I let myself grieve fully too, not just for my husband, but for all the years Richard had spent running from the love we tried to give him. "He knew," I whispered. "Your father knew everything. Your struggles, your fears, your potential. Why do you think he built all those protections? He was giving you space to fail safely, hoping you would eventually find your way back. I wasted so much time." "Then don't waste what's left." By the 3rd month, Richard had settled into his new life with surprising grace. He'd taken the night stalking position, discovered he liked the solitude and physical work his apartment, the modest 2-bedroom I'd given him, gradually filled with second-hand furniture and books borrowed from the library. "I'm reading again," he told me one Sunday, showing me a worn copy of East of Eden. Margaret recommended it. She said Steinbeck understood sons and fathers and the weight of expectations. "Do you understand them now?" "I'm beginning to." He set the book down carefully. "Dr. Chen says I spent my whole life trying to prove I was different from you and Dad. More successful, more ambitious, more important. But all I proved was that I'd forgotten where I came from, and that forgetting made me cruel. The words were hard-earned wisdom, and I honored them with silence." 4 months in, Richard completed his medical volunteer training and began working with elderly patients at a community clinic. "I want to go back to school," he announced one Sunday. "Not business, medicine, geriatric care specifically. That's a long road, years of study. I have time, and for the first time in my adult life, I'm not in a hurry to get somewhere else." He met my eyes. "I'm exactly where I need to be." 6 months after signing those documents, Richard brought someone to Sunday dinner, Margaret from the senior center, dressed in her finest vintage dress, pearls glowing against her dark skin. "Mary," she said warmly, "your son speaks of you constantly. I had to meet the woman who loved him enough to let him fall, and then offered her hand to help him stand, over pot roast and Alfred's favorite wine." Margaret told stories of Richard's transformation, his patience with confused residents, his gentle humor with the lonely, his willingness to simply sit and listen. "He's found his calling," she said. "Some people spend their whole lives searching. Your boy found his in the ruins of his old one." After Margaret left, Richard and I stood on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker like earthbound stars. "Mom, I want to ask you something. Anything. Tell me about the island. Tell me what Dad envisioned." I pulled out the folder I'd been keeping. Alfred's notes, sketches, dreams rendered in his precise handwriting. Together, under the forgiving darkness, we began to plan our future. 2 years after Richard signed those documents, we stood before a renovated Victorian mansion in the heart of the city, a building I'd purchased with Alfred's investments, transformed with Richard's vision and my determination. The sign above the door read, "Alfred's Haven, where generations connect." "He would have loved this," Richard said softly, adjusting his new medical school jacket. He'd been accepted to UCSF's geriatric program, starting in the fall. But first we had this opening ceremony. Inside, 15 residents waited, elderly men and women who'd been living in inadequate facilities or dangerous isolation. We'd spent 6 months interviewing, selecting people who wanted community, not just care. Margaret had been our first resident naturally, Harold our second. The space transformed Alfred's wealth into warmth. A library with floor-to-ceiling books, a music room with Margaret's donated piano, a garden where Harold grew tomatoes that actually tasted like his childhood in Kansas. Medical care met at the intersection of dignity. Nurses who learned residents' names, their stories, their dreams. But Alfred's Haven wasn't just an assisted living facility. It was an experiment in intergenerational connection. "They're here," Richard announced, checking his watch. Through the front door came 15 high school students, participants in our mentorship program, troubled kids, system kids, kids who'd given up on adults who kept giving up on them. We'd partnered with the school district to create something unprecedented. Students earned community service credit by spending time with our residents, but what they actually earned was something more valuable. I watched Miguel, a 17-year-old with a record of truancy and minor theft, sit beside Harold. They'd been paired for 3 months now. Harold was teaching Miguel woodworking. Miguel was teaching Harold about hip-hop. Neither understood the other's world, but that was exactly the point. "How's the jewelry box coming?" Harold asked, his weathered hands guiding Miguel's younger ones across sandpaper. "Almost done. Mama's birthday is next week." Miguel's voice held shy pride. "She's gonna cry when she sees it. Good crying or bad crying. Good. Definitely good. She keeps saying, 'I never finish nothing.' This time I am." Across the room, Jasmine, a girl who'd been in 3 foster homes, sat with Margaret, learning to play Moonlight Serenade on the piano. Margaret's arthritic fingers could barely reach the keys anymore, but she guided Jasmine's hands with the authority of someone who'd performed at Carnegie Hall. "Feel the music," Margaret instructed. "Don't just play the notes. Feel what Miller was saying about longing, about nights that stretched too long, about hope waiting for dawn." Jasmine closed her eyes, and the music shifted from mechanical to meaningful. When she finished, tears streaked her face. "Why am I crying?" she asked, confused. "Because you felt something real," Margaret said gently. "That's what art does. It lets us feel safely." I found Richard in his office, a converted sunroom where he saw residents for basic medical consultations. The pre-med textbooks on his shelves still smelled new. "The inspection results came in," I said, handing him the envelope. He opened it with steady hands. "Perfect marks. They said we're setting a new standard for elder care." He looked up, eyes bright. "Mom, we did it. We actually built something that works." "Your father built it. We're just following the blueprint." "No." Richard stood, coming around the desk. "Dad left materials and instructions, but you had the courage to use them after everything I did to you. You could have just lived comfortably off his investments. Instead, you built this." Through the window, we watched residents and students mingling in the garden. Harold was showing 3 kids how to properly stake tomato plants. Margaret was teaching a girl to knit. An elderly woman named Ruth was helping a boy with his English homework, her retired teacher instincts sharp as ever. "I had help," I said quietly. "You had a son who tried to rob you and then spent 2 years learning how to be human again." Richard's voice cracked. "But you're right. That son did help. You let him." "And that's the part that still amazes me." A knock interrupted us. Mr. Harrison stood in the doorway, smiling broadly. "The ceremony's about to start. Are you ready?" We gathered everyone in the main hall. Residents, students, staff, donors, city officials who'd supported our permits and licensing. The room buzzed with conversation, the kind of organic noise that comes when people genuinely enjoy being together. I stepped to the small podium, hands trembling slightly. Public speaking had never been my strength. "Thank you all for being here. 2 years ago, I lost my husband, Alfred. I thought I'd lost everything. My partner, my future, my sense of who I was without him." I paused, finding Richard in the crowd. "I almost lost my son too. Not to death, but to something equally devastating. The distance we let grow between us. But Alfred, being the remarkable man he was, left behind more than money. He left a challenge. Could love be stronger than pain? Could forgiveness build something more lasting than anger? Could a family broken by greed and misunderstanding find a way to heal, not by forgetting what happened, but by creating something meaningful from the wreckage? Alfred's Haven is our answer. It's a place where the elderly aren't warehoused but celebrated, where young people learn that wisdom comes from listening, where generations discover they need each other more than they knew. My voice strengthened. It's also a place where a mother and son learn to see each other clearly, not as we wished we were, but as we actually are, flawed, trying, sometimes failing, but always, always showing up. Richard stepped forward, and together we pulled the cloth from a bronze plaque on the wall. Alfred's Haven, founded in loving memory of Alfred Goodman, who believed that the greatest inheritance is not what we leave behind, but what we inspire others to build. The applause washed over us, but I barely heard it. I was watching Richard wipe his eyes, watching Margaret beam with maternal pride, watching Harold give Richard a thumbs up that meant more than any award. After the ceremony, as guests mingled over refreshments, Mr. Harrison pulled me aside. "There's one more thing, Alfred left." I was instructed to wait until Alfred's Haven was operational before revealing it. He handed me an envelope. Inside, a deed to St. Catherine's Isle, and a letter in Alfred's handwriting. "My darling Mary, if you're reading this, then you've built the Haven. You've taken my dream and made it real. Now comes the next chapter. The island isn't just land. It's possibility. A place where what you've started here can expand, grow, transform. Take our son there. Show him what legacy really means. I'll be with you both, in the waves and wind, watching you build something beautiful from the ashes of almost losing each other. With eternal love, Alfred." I looked up to find Richard watching me from across the room, his face questioning. I held up the deed and smiled. It was time to show him the island. The ferry cut through morning fog, revealing St. Catherine's Isle in fragments. First the dark silhouette of pines, then the rocky coastline, finally the pristine beaches that seemed untouched by time. Richard stood at the railing beside me, breath caught in his throat. "Dad owned this." His voice was barely audible over the engine's hum. "An entire island." "He preserved it," I corrected. "There's a difference." The ferryman, a weathered local named Tom, who'd maintained the island for decades under Alfred's instruction, navigated us to a small dock. "Your husband used to come here every few months," he told me, securing the boat. Just him, a notebook, and his thoughts. He'd sit on that cliff for hours, planning something. Never told me what. Now, 2 years after Alfred's death, I was finally seeing what he'd planned. A path wound through old-growth forest, cathedral quiet, except for birdsong. Richard walked ahead, occasionally stopping to touch ancient bark, to stare up at canopies that filtered sunlight into green-gold splendor. We emerged at a meadow where a weathered cabin stood, simple, beautiful, Alfred's handwriting evident in every careful corner. Inside we found his journals, more detailed than those at home. These were architectural sketches, ecological surveys, financial projections, and a letter addressed to both of us. Richard's hands shook as he opened it. We read together, shoulder to shoulder, our shadows merging on the wooden floor. "My dearest Mary and Richard, if you're reading this together, then something miraculous has happened. You've found your way back to each other. Mary, you've forgiven Richard. You've changed, and now you're ready for what I've preserved here. St. Catherine's Isle is 42 acres of untouched coastline, forest, and meadow. I've maintained it for 15 years, waiting for this moment. Here's what I envision. A sanctuary where what you built with Alfred's Haven can expand. Imagine cottages along the South Shore, comfortable, accessible homes where elderly residents can spend weeks or months in nature, where they can fish, garden, paint, write, all the things institutional living denies them. Imagine an education center where students come not just to serve, but to learn. Environmental studies, marine biology, forestry, sustainable living, taught by visiting professors. Yes, but also by our residents who carry decades of practical knowledge. Imagine intergenerational summers where teenagers and elders work side by side, building trails, restoring habitat, cooking meals, sharing stories around campfires where both groups discover they have something essential to teach and learn. This island is my final gift, possibility itself. Richard, I know by now you've walked a hard road to be standing here. I'm proud of you, not for your destination, but for choosing to walk at all when it would have been easier to give up, Mary, my eternal love. You've always been braver than you believed. Now prove it one more time. Build something impossible. The island is yours. The future is yours. Make it beautiful forever, Alfred. Richard sank into a chair, letter trembling in his hands. He forgave me. Even after everything, he forgave me. He loved you. There's a difference there too. I touched his shoulder. Love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. We spent the day exploring, following trails Alfred had marked, discovering a freshwater spring, finding the cliff where Tom said Alfred used to sit. The view stole our breath. Endless ocean, wheeling seabirds, the curve of coastline stretching toward infinity. We could do it, Richard said suddenly. Everything he imagined, the cottages, the programs, the summers, his excitement built with each word. I've been studying gerontology, learning about therapeutic landscapes. Nature exposure reduces anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, and for the students, environmental education combined with service learning, that's transformative. I watched my son come alive with purpose, and for the first time since his childhood, I saw Alfred in his gestures, his passion, his careful planning that balanced dream with practical execution. It'll take years, I cautioned. Permits, construction, staffing, funding. We have Alfred's investments. We have Alfred's Haven as a model. We have residents who'd love this and students who need it. He turned to me, eyes bright. Mom, we have everything we need except the courage to start. And I think we've both proven we have that. Over the following months, we built the vision like assembling a cathedral. One stone, one beam, one dream at a time. Richard worked with architects to design cottages that honored the landscape. Accessible, comfortable, with floor-to-ceiling windows that brought the forest inside, solar panels hidden among trees, composting systems, water reclamation, everything Alfred would have approved. I worked with educators to create curriculum. Students would spend 8 weeks on the island, studying ecology while working alongside residents. Margaret immediately volunteered to teach music theory. Harold signed up for woodworking and veterans history. Ruth wanted to lead writing workshops. My students need to know their stories matter, she told me. Her retired teacher fire undimmed. Who better to teach that than people who've lived 8 decades of stories? We broke ground on the first cottages in spring. Miguel, now graduated and working construction, led the student crew. Jasmine, enrolled in music school, came weekends to help design the performance space where Margaret would eventually teach on a perfect June morning. We held another ceremony, this one on the island's meadow, with 60 people who'd made this dream possible. Margaret played piano on an electric keyboard powered by solar batteries, her fingers finding strength and joy. Harold led us in a prayer that referenced no specific God, but acknowledged everything sacred: connection, purpose, the chance to become better than we were, and Richard, wearing his medical school whites, spoke about his father. I never understood Alfred Goodman while he lived. I thought he was simple, satisfied with too little, afraid to want more. I was wrong about everything. He wasn't simple. He was profound. He wasn't satisfied. He was content. He didn't want more. He wanted meaning, Richard's voice carried across the meadow. This island, Alfred's Haven, every choice he made, they were all love letters to the future, to my mother, to me, to people he'd never meet who'd benefit from his foresight. I squandered years chasing wealth while he was quietly building legacy. I almost destroyed us both in my pursuit of things that don't matter. But he left me one final gift, the chance to understand what actually does. He looked at me. Mom, thank you for not giving up when I'd given you every reason to. Thank you for showing me that redemption isn't found. It's built. One day, one choice, one act of service at a time. As applause rippled through the crowd, I saw Tom the ferryman wipe his eyes, saw Miguel standing straighter, pride radiating from his posture, saw Jasmine holding Margaret's hand, both of them crying happily, and I felt Alfred, in the breeze through pines, in the warmth of sun on my face, in the certainty that some loves transcend mortality. We did it, I whispered to the wind. We built your dream, my love, the ocean answered with the eternal patience of tides that shape stone. 3 years after receiving that devastating text message, I stood on St. Catherine's Isle watching the first cohort of students arrive for our inaugural summer program. 20 teenagers, 40 elderly residents, and infinite possibilities stretched before us. The cottages Richard had designed dotted the southern shore like prayers, each one unique, each one accessible, each one offering a window to wonder, Margaret had claimed the one closest to the music hall. Harold chose the cottage nearest the woodworking studio. Ruth selected the writer's cabin overlooking the sea. Richard, now in his second year of medical school, had taken a leave of absence to direct the program's first season. He stood at the dock, greeting each student by name. Having memorized their files with the same dedication Alfred once brought to his investment research. "You're Maya?" he said to a girl with guarded eyes. "Your application essay was about your grandmother's stories. She's in Cottage 7, Ruth Martinez. I think you two need to meet." Maya's eyes widened. "You remembered that. Every word. That's what we do here. We remember, we listen, we connect." He gestured toward the path. "Welcome home." I watched this stranger who wore my son's face, patient, present, purposeful. The Richard who'd sent that cruel text felt like ancient history, a nightmare from someone else's life. This Richard, the one who'd emerged from rubble and remorse, was the son Alfred had always believed existed beneath the ambition and fear. Our opening ceremony took place in the meadow where Alfred used to sit with his notebooks. 100 people gathered as sunset painted the sky in watercolor washes, elderly residents in wheelchairs and on canes, students in their program T-shirts, staff who'd helped build this impossible dream, and Mr. Harrison, who'd guarded Alfred's vision through every legal complexity. I approached the microphone with a letter I'd found among Alfred's things just days before. One final message he'd left with his journals, sealed and marked, "When the island opens." "Before I read this," I said, "I want you to know what this place represents. 3 years ago, I was a widow who'd lost everything. My husband, my son, my sense of purpose. I had every reason to be bitter, to guard what remained, to let anger define my remaining years. But Alfred, in his infinite wisdom, gave me a choice. He'd built walls to protect me. Yes, but he'd also built doors. Doors that led to the hardest question I've ever faced. Would I choose revenge or redemption? Would I protect myself or risk loving again?" I looked at Richard, who stood with the students, no longer separate but part of something larger. "I chose redemption, not because it was easy. It was agonizing, not because I was certain. I doubted every step, but because Alfred taught me that love isn't a feeling we fall into. It's a decision we make, over and over, even when it costs everything." I opened the letter, Alfred's familiar handwriting swimming before my eyes. "To everyone gathered on St. Catherine's Isle, if you're reading this, then something miraculous has occurred. Not just the opening of this sanctuary, but the healing of my family. Mary, my darling, has chosen the harder path of love. Richard, my son, has found his way home. And together, they've built what I could only imagine. This island isn't about me. It's about what happens when we stop measuring legacy in dollars and start measuring it in lives changed, in generations connected, in the courage to believe people can become better than they were. To the students, you've been told you're troubled, difficult, lost. Those labels are lies. You're unfinished, which means you're full of possibility. The elders here have lived entire lifetimes. They've failed spectacularly, succeeded against odds, loved and lost and loved again. Listen to them. Their wisdom is your inheritance. To the residents, you've been told your productive years are behind you, that your burdens to be managed. Those labels are lies too. Your repositories of knowledge society can't afford to lose. The students here are hungry for meaning you can provide. Teach them. Your experience is their education. To my son, Richard, if you're standing there having helped build this, then you've learned what I spent 40 years trying to teach you. Success isn't what you acquire. It's what you build that outlasts you. It's not about being remembered. It's about creating something that helps others remember themselves. To my wife, Mary, you were always the strong one. You just needed to discover that strength. Thank you for forgiving our son. Thank you for honoring my dreams. Thank you for 43 years of making me better than I could have been alone. I love you across the barrier of death and will love you across the expanse of eternity. This island is my final gift, not to you, but through you. Make it a place where hurting people heal, where lost people find themselves, where the old feel young with purpose and the young grow wise with perspective. And remember, the true measure of a life well lived isn't the wealth accumulated or prestige earned. It's the number of people who stand at your memorial and say, because of them, I became more than I thought possible, with love that transcends endings. Alfred Goodman. Silence held the meadow. Then Miguel raised his hand. I want to say something, if that's okay. I nodded. He stood. This young man who'd arrived angry and suspicious, who'd found redemption in Harold's patient woodworking lessons. Before this program, I was nobody going nowhere. I had a record, a reputation, and no reason to believe I'd be anything different. Then Harold, his voice cracked. Harold told me everyone deserves a second draft, that the first version of ourselves is just practice for who we're becoming. Harold, seated in his wheelchair, smiled. Mr. Goodman never met me, Miguel continued, but he built this place knowing kids like me would need it. He didn't see troubled teens. He saw potential waiting for permission. So I just want to say, thank you, Mr. Goodman. Thank you for believing in people you'd never meet. Thank you for building doors instead of walls. Maya stood next. I want to thank Ruth for showing me that my grandmother's stories matter, that my stories matter, that storytelling isn't just entertainment. It's how we pass wisdom between worlds. One by one, students and residents stood, sharing what this place had already given them. Not just programs or activities, but permission to be more, to fail safely, to try again, to matter. Richard was the last to stand. He walked to the center, facing me directly. Mom, 3 years ago, I sent you the cruelest message a son could send. I tried to steal not just your property, but your security, your memories, your future. You could have destroyed me. You had every legal, moral right. Instead, tears streamed freely. Instead, you offered me a choice, change or lose you forever. I chose change, and every single day since, I've worked to become worthy of that choice. He gestured at the island. But here's what I'm only now understanding. This isn't just about me earning redemption. It's about us building something that lets hundreds of people earn their own. Dad didn't just save me. He created a system that saves people like me, like Miguel, like every student who'll come here believing they're broken, and shows them the truth. We're not broken. We're becoming. He took my hands. Thank you, Mom, for seeing who I could be when I couldn't see it myself, for loving me through the worst of me to reach the best of me, for honoring Dad by building his impossible dream. I pulled my son into an embrace, and for the first time in years, it felt complete. No guardedness, no performance, just a mother and son who'd found each other again through the rubble of almost losing everything as the sun set. Painting the ocean in molten gold, Margaret began playing. The melody drifted across the meadow. Something original, something she'd composed for this moment. Jasmine joined her, their 4 hands creating harmony that spoke of endings and beginnings, of loss and discovery, of every painful, beautiful thing that makes us human. Harold stood, steadying himself on his cane, and raised his voice in a toast. To Alfred Goodman, who understood that the best way to be remembered is to help others remember what matters. To Alfred, everyone echoed, voices carrying across water and stone and time. That night, after the ceremony ended and residents settled into their cottages, Richard and I walked to the cliff where Alfred used to sit. The stars emerged one by one, ancient light reaching us across impossible distances. Do you think he knew, Richard asked softly, that it would work out this way? I think he hoped. Hope and knowledge aren't the same thing, but sometimes hope is braver. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He left us materials and instructions, but we had to choose to build. That's the gift, Richard. Not the money or property, the choice. I almost chose wrong, but you didn't. That's what matters. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the ocean remember its ancient rhythms. Somewhere behind us, laughter drifted from the cottages. Miguel teaching Harold a card game, Maya reading her poetry to Ruth, Jasmine playing requests on Margaret's keyboard. The sounds of community, of connection, of people discovering they needed each other. Mom, Richard's voice was tentative. Can I ask you something? Anything? Do you forgive me? Really, truly forgive me? Or are you just being kind because that's who you are? I thought about the question. Really thought about it. Did I forgive him? Or was I just going through motions of forgiveness because Alfred would have wanted it? I forgive you, I said finally. and felt the truth of it settle in my bones. Not because you've earned it through service or changed behavior. Those things matter. But forgiveness isn't a reward for good behavior. It's a gift we give when holding on to anger costs more than letting go. I took his hand. I forgive you because you're my son, because Alfred loved you, because life's too short to spend it guarding grudges instead of building dreams. Richard's shoulders shook with silent tears. I held him as I'd held him as a child, when nightmares woke him, when playground cruelty wounded him, when the world felt too big and he felt too small. I love you, Mom, he whispered. I should have said it more, should have shown it better, but I do. I always did, even when I forgot how. I know, sweetheart, I know. A shooting star traced across the darkness. Brief, brilliant, gone, but its light had traveled millions of miles to reach us in that exact moment. A reminder that even things that seem to disappear leave their mark on the universe. We did it, Alfred, I whispered to the stars, to the ocean, to the man who'd seen all of this in his notebooks and believed it could be real. We built your dream, and it's more beautiful than you ever imagined. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of pine and salt and possibility. Somewhere below, the ferry horn sounded, Tom bringing another group of volunteers for tomorrow's trail building. The island was alive now, no longer just preserved but purposeful. Richard stood, offering me his hand. Come on, Margaret wants to teach you that song she wrote. She says you need to learn it for the next ceremony. There's going to be another ceremony. Mom, there are going to be hundreds of ceremonies, thousands of students, decades of stories. He smiled, the genuine smile of someone who'd found his purpose and himself simultaneously. We're just getting started. We walked back towards the cottages, their windows glowing warm against the darkness. Behind us, the ocean continued its eternal conversation with the shore. Above us, stars bore witness to two people who'd been broken and rebuilt, who'd lost and found, who'd learned that the truest legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we build together. It's what we become. It's love, stubborn, difficult, redemptive love that refuses to give up even when giving up would be easier. And that, I realized, was what Alfred had been teaching us all along.